Hi everybody, my name is Lisa Noble, and first I have to apologize, my voice is a little strange. Today I've been sick, so I've been walking around with a mask to try and save you all from getting sick, but so bear with me as I make it through the presentation today. So my name is Lisa Noble. It is spelled L-I-S-E, and the last name is Noble. I'm a distinguished UX UI engineer from Discover Financial Services. Anyone who doesn't know how to distinguish or know the distinction between UX and UI, UX stands for user experiences, and we all have hundreds of those every day, checking into your hotel, buying a cup of coffee, getting an Uber. Those are all user experiences. And user interface UI stands for user interfaces. Now more and more of our experiences daily have user interfaces. They're becoming more and more digital every day. And when there is a user interface involved, that's a really important part of creating an effective user experience. So today I'm here to talk to you guys about our accessibility theme builder. And here's a little summary of what I'm going to be walking you guys through today. I'm going to talk with you about a summary of our design to deployment journey and the pain points associated with that. I'm going to talk to you about why accessibility is important. Then I'm going to examine, like, what if we took a different perspective the way we approach this. I'm going to introduce you to our theme builder, give you guys a live demo, and then talk about what's coming next. So, as I mentioned, I am both a distinguished UX and UI designer. And so what I did is I used UX to explore the way we were building our UI. What that meant was I applied design thinking skills to talk to people about the end-to-end process. I talked to our designers, our developers, our PO, and also to the people who were consuming the user experiences that we were creating at the end. And what I identified was a series of pain points along the way. And there were a lot of pain points, not only for the designers and the developers, and certainly for the end users that I identified. And they weren't specific to our company. I've been working at a number of companies over the years, and I can tell you that these pain points are being repeated by every company, right? Because every company in the world is building a design system, right? They're building their user experiences. And it's building those user experiences and those interfaces is getting harder and harder because we're dealing with desktop and mobile and tablet. We have light mode, we have dark mode, we have globalization, and then we have accessibility. In addition, designs are always changing, right? So if you built your design system 5 years ago, just like fashion, it probably looks outdated. Accessibility guidelines are also changing. Anybody who's been chasing that probably knows that WCAG 2.1 was what you were chasing. 2.2 just came out, and everyone's like, oh my God, what does this mean? So those are always changing as well. As well are the tools that we use to build interfaces, right? The designers' tools are always changing. A few years ago, we were all using Sketch. Now it's Figma. If you built a Figma system last year, and now you see the beta version out, you're like, oh crap, we have to start all over again. So also the coding languages with which we're making our design systems are always changing. So it really takes thousands of hours for designers and developers to create these design systems. And it's all to create components that are really non-proprietary, right? There's nothing extraordinary about your button or your drop-down menu. I mean, I hate to say that, right? But that's the truth. And yet there's thousands of hours going into that. So just for people who don't know what accessibility means, accessibility really means that people with disabilities can complete tasks in the same amount of time or effort as people who don't have accessibility needs. So certainly when it comes to financial applications, people should be able to access their financial applications independently and with ease. Now, the golden standard nowadays that we all are striving for is provided by the Web Accessibility Initiative. 2.1 provides the specifications that we're trying to attain. It is the level AA that is required for companies to achieve in order to get some sort of legal coverage, because financial institutions are upheld to a standard to create these experiences for people. So most of us are federally obligated. So it is a compliance issue, and because of that, it's also a risk issue. If you're a company that is not meeting accessibility needs, you open yourself up to lawsuits, class action lawsuits, and a lot of fines. So when we talk about disabilities, what am I talking about? Well, we're talking about visual disabilities, hearing, motor, and cognitive. Now, a lot of people don't know that cognitive is a disability that we should take into consideration. Now, there are 1 billion people in the world who have disabilities, and the largest group is actually represented by cognitive disabilities, and it's actually the area that we're doing the least amount of work in regards to creating accessible experiences. The other thing I want to mention about accessibility is our age and temporary situational disabilities. Now, if we're all fortunate enough to grow old, more than likely, we will probably experience all of those accessibility needs, right? We may have vision loss, hearing loss, mobility issues, and some cognitive issues. So age is kind of the great equalizer. If you don't know the need now, you probably will learn about the need later. Also, there are temporary or situational disabilities. People who work in dark places all day and come out, suddenly they can't look at bright screens. Women holding children don't have the dexterity and the mobility of both hands when they're using devices. So these are some other factors to think about. So as I mentioned, it's the right thing to do, right? It's also the federally required thing to do, but most people don't know that it's the smart thing to do. So Forrester recently did a research, and they found that for every dollar a company invests in accessibility, they get $100 back. And that's an incredible return of investment. But people with disabilities also account for $1 trillion in disposable income. That's an extraordinary amount of money, but when you take into account that friends and family of people with disabilities are fiercely loyal to them and therefore prefer to do businesses with brands that take accessibility into account, that impact grows to $8 trillion. So we all know it's the right thing, it's the smart thing, it's a financially savvy thing, and yet how are we doing? Well, according to the Global Accessibility Day website, we're doing a horrible job, guys. So 98.1 of digital landing experiences fail the WCAG 2.0 failure rate, and with an average rate of 60.9 failures per page. And that's really awful, and you think about that's where companies are putting a lot of effort. If you go a couple of pages deeper, those stats are actually going to be quite a lot worse, right? Which is hard to believe. Anyway, so what I'm here to talk to you about today is, well, what if we took a different approach? What if we all, instead of working in our silos, creating these buttons over and over again, how about we all work together? And we apply logic and we bring accessibility into the core of the way that we build our design systems. And what if we really reimagined what accessibility is? I mean, we're all racing around with our heads cut off trying to meet the minimum, though we're really not taking a step back to look at how we can actually create impactful digital experiences for people with disabilities. And honestly, it's not that hard, but no one's really thinking about it. So I'd like to introduce you guys to the Accessibility Theme Builder. The concept here is that we take an out-of-the-box Figma design file and an out-of-the-box React component library. And what we do is we let you bring in your design, your brand guidelines, and we apply accessibility logic to that. And what we spit out is code that gives you a branded accessibility design system and a branded Figma component library. The magic there is that they both map to each other. They're an exact match to each other because what we use is tokens to tokenize both the Figma library and the React component library. Now, if anyone has ever worked with a design team and an engineering team on building a component library, you know the thousands of hours it takes to get to that point, right? Because for designers, you create a look and feel, you hand it off to development, you come back and you go, well, it's kind of close, but it's off here, it's off there, and then you're told you have to make get issues to fix those. And they get tagged with cosmetic, right, issues. And guess what? Those cosmetic issues get pushed farther and farther and farther to the backlog. So design systems fall farther and farther apart. And at the end, it's a bad experience for the end user because what was intended to be the design isn't there. And anyway, that's the reason it's a problem. But the other thing here is that not only will we give you a branded design system for light mode, but we will also create a dark mode for you, a mobile, a desktop, and a tablet mode for all of those. But we'll also create accessibility layers. And what I mean by that is we have taken a step back to reimagine what we can do for people with accessibility needs. For example, we have a layer called dyslexia. If you're dyslexic, we will replace all the fonts in our design system with a dyslexic font that makes it people with dyslexia easier to read and consume the content. We also increase the line height, which increases readability for people with dyslexia. And we're also looking at whether we should also increase contrast, so we're doing some research behind that. We also have a motion sensitivity mode. There's a lot of people out there who motion is a little triggering for them in terms of their disabilities, but there's also a lot of people that just find the amount of motion in mobile apps today a little bit dizzying. So people can turn that on and off. And we have 8 forms of color blindness modes that we're working on and we're about to release. There's a misconception out there that you can have one design system or one design palette that means every color palette color blindness needs. And it's simply not true, especially when you're trying to meet WCAG guidelines in light mode and in dark mode. And I will tell you that meeting WCAG's requirement in dark mode is incredibly difficult. If anyone in here has tried to do it, the reason that it's hard is your color choices get limited to colors that have a saturation point below 0.50, and white is no longer a pure white, but white with an opacity of 0.60. So getting those contrasts are increasingly complex, and we do all the math for you. So how did we do this? Well, we started to look at the way Brad Frost proposes the building of design systems. And again, this isn't something we created. This is a commonly used approach out there. So the idea is that you start with the most basic building blocks of your design system, which he considered to be colors, fonts, icons, and then you group those things together to create molecules. An example of that would be a button, right? It's your color, it's your font, it's with some beveled edge, and then you group those things together to create organisms. An example of that would be like a card. You've got a title, maybe an image, some text, and some buttons, and then you group those together to create templates. An example of that would be a search bar with a table underneath and some pagination. And then finally, you wire all those things together to create experiences. The only problem with this is, of course, you can create your whole design system, and this won't affect anything about accessibility. So how did we solve this? Well, we went subatomic. So we introduced the concept of protons, neutrons, and electrons into our design system. So basically, the protons and neutrons and electrons represent, for every color that you introduce into our design system, into Theme Builder, we create 10 shades of that color in light mode and dark mode. And what we do is we pair it with an on color, which means that's whatever color you should have text or icons on top of it in order to meet that WCAG requirement of 4.5 to 1. So that sounds very mundane, but there's a lot of math that actually goes into doing that and creating that for you. Now, when you tether your atoms together and your molecules together, we make sure that when you tether those together, that you're meeting the requirements. An example of that is when you're going to create a button, we won't let you pick a button once you've picked your background that won't match the 3.1 contrast requirement to the background for that button. But also, for every component that you create, we create it in that button color, so whatever that branded button color is going to be. We also create a black button and a white button. So why do we do that? That's because when you drop a button on a different color background, and every company does this and doesn't know they do it, right? Your design systems are usually created in context. Your designer created a Figma file with a button. It may be a beautiful blue button. If you put it on a white background, perfect. If you put it on a gray background, it may not pass accessibility anymore. If you put it on a black background, it probably doesn't pass accessibility anymore. If you put it on any number of colors, first of all, you shouldn't, but anyway, it's probably not going to pass accessibility. So the reason that we did that is so that we can automatically create a digital experience that your designers and your developers don't need to think about, and I'll show you that a little bit later. But anyway, the result of this is that we can create an entire experience for you in light and dark mode for mobile, tablet, and desktop, and do all the logic for you, making sure that everything's accessible. So with that said, what I'm going to do is jump into a quick demo to give you guys an example of how this is done. All right, so when you come to Theme Builder, and I will give you guys a QR code for this later, we actually have a Git repo, but we also have an online instance for this. And the reason is that we're trying to encourage designers to get involved in this open source project. We feel like open source projects and most projects operate most effectively when you have designers and developers working hand in hand. We also have UX researchers working on this project too. So if anyone's interested in getting involved, please reach out to me and let me know. All right, so I'm just gonna get started here, and I'm gonna call this our Finos theme builder. First thing I'm gonna do is start adding some colors, as I mentioned. First thing I'll do is I'll add like a green color. Oh shoot, all right. Gonna add a green color, and as I mentioned before, you're gonna see these 10 shades in light mode and in dark mode. If I turn on the details here, you'll see the details of all the colors. But what you will notice is all of those color contrasts have a contrast of 4.5 to 1. Now again, this seems like it's really easy, but you can't just do this out of the box. You can't just create 10 colors and automatically either white or black text is going to work on it. There's a lot of colors in our spectrum that do not meet the requirements, and even fewer in dark mode. So we do all the logic for you. Now, for the purposes of Theme Builder, you really only need one color. You can build a totally monochromatic theme if you want, but I am going to add a few more colors to here. And then I'm going to add sort of a plum color. All right. All right. Now that I have those colors added, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go build my theme. All right, and the thing you're going to notice is as I'm going along, you're going to see the interface start to change. And the reason we wanted that is we actually wanted the person who was putting this logic into the system to experience the design system. So we actually used our guides from the way Material develops their design systems with a primary, secondary, and tertiary color. The next thing that you need to do is pick what your background is going to be for your light mode. I'm going to pick white. You can also pick black or a very pale color of the primary color or a very dark shade of the primary color. And then in dark mode, same. You can either pick black or a very dark shade of that color. And next thing I'm going to do is create some gradients. Now, a lot of people say, like, well, why did you guys put gradients here? Well, designers like to use gradients, and it's a very effective tool for design, but it's also where designs often fall apart. If you pick two colors that have a different on color, then you can't put text on top of it that meets that accessibility guideline. So I'll create another one here. And you can go across colors. I'm just going to keep it consistent here and have it be the same. And then here is where I'm going to pick my button color. Again, it's limiting the colors in your color palette to those that meet the accessibility guidelines against your primary and your secondary background colors. Now you can see your primary and secondary background colors here. This is the primary and this is the secondary. Again, that's often used in design, especially in long pages where people don't want a long white page, but they want some color contrast in the pages. So we make sure that the button color maps against both of those. So I'm going to pick a green button or maybe a pink button, and then I'm going to pick my icon color. All right, we're almost done, and then I'm going to pick a gradient header. Again, gradient headers, something, just a design thing, but this can fall apart too. Same reason you don't have the contrast guidelines. And finally, I have a decorative color. It will never be used with text or icons or anything on top of it. All right, now that that's initialized, I get a preview of what my design system themes look like. And then we can move on. So the next thing that we can do is set our fonts. What we did for now is you can pick from the 101 most popular fonts in Google. I am just going to grab one. Let's see, I'm going to do IBM Plex Sans. And then I am going to, let's see, pick random. All right, so now that I have those, you can again see that this design system is changing as I go. Let's see, I'll pick a new line height. I can change my line heights. I can change all sorts of things about our design system that a designer would want to be able to play around with. We have headers here, and what we did is we created the displays and the headers. They scale to be consistent, and you can play around with the sizing that you want. This is also a place where the designers sometimes know that headers can kind of get a little wild and crazy, so we try to keep it consistent. You can change all of the body fonts, the small text styles, and the stats. And then we have something here called elevations. Now, in light mode, elevations are shown with increasing drop shadows, and in dark mode, they're showed with increasing lightness. So things get closer to you in dark mode. And we calculate those for you, but you can also play around with the settings to get just sort of the look and feel that you want that represents your brand. We also have bevels, and we all know that bevels kind of went out in the 90s, I think. But again, we didn't want to limit our designers and their creativeness. So what we did is we created 9 shades of bevels, inverses, bevels, grooves, ridges, and recesses. And now once you build all of these things for your design system, they can get applied to your molecules. And I will go ahead and show you guys that now. First of all, other atoms. Oh, shoot. Sorry, I don't know what I just did, but I'll go back to this. Sorry, I'm not feeling well, so I'm not sure what I did. All right, I'm going to go back to molecules. All right, so once you have all of your molecules set, the other atoms I wanted to show you guys were grid systems. Lots of companies use an 8 or a 10 pixel grid system, and you can also set your minimum target. Now, WCAG requires that your minimum target for desktop is 24 pixels. For mobile and tablet, most companies are aiming for 44 or 48. That's sort of Apple and Android standard. But to WCAG, you don't have to actually have it meet that. It can be 24. I don't recommend it. But if you're creating desktops that are for engineers or people who need content density, you may, in fact, want to go down to 24. If you're creating a marketing site, you probably want larger target areas. So we let you control that. I'm going to say 48 here for tablet, and I'll say, actually, I want to go back to my grid system. I prefer an 8 grid system, and I am going to say 32 here. You can also set your state colors, your default borders, hot links, inputs. There's a lot of different things. But where it gets fun is now that I have those things set, I can go to like my buttons and I can start applying what I created in my atomic level to my molecular level. So I can set the minimum height for my buttons, and I'm going to keep that at 44. I'm going to just have them be not as rounded. So I only have to change it in one place, and it's going to get changed throughout all the buttons. Now, again, everyone says, well, what's the big deal of creating a button, right? Well, for every button, there's probably like 100 different types of variety of buttons that you can create. And in Figma, if you create all those different varieties and then you have to change the radius of them, you can have to sometimes change it in 100 different places. And if it's not coded effectively, and that can be the same thing. Anyway, so I'm going to change that radius here. I also have something called the small button. And people are like, well, how can you have a small button if I just told you that the minimum height needs to be 33? What we do is we have a parent container around a lot of our elements that we want to visually perhaps look smaller, that have the target area of whatever you set, but look smaller than they do to the end user, which means it still meets the required requirement or whatever you specify as that minimum target area, but it won't look as overwhelming and bearing. And that's the same for radio buttons, check boxes, sliders, which can be really small and hard for people to get their finger on. So again, we have a parent container around that in order to make that happen. That is also the same with our chips here as well. So now you can see that you can, apply all these different stylings to these various components. And then what we do is we create for you a whole design system, a component library. Here you can see the colors that I have. You can see the accordion, my app bar. And what you'll see is what we do is every time you change the color, sorry, this is in dark mode, every component and organism and template you can view in light mode and in dark mode. And then we render them in the various colors in your design system. And what we automatically do is update the color of the on color and the buttons and everything. Your engineers don't need to think about it, and the designers don't need to think about it. I'll show you guys a little bit more of that later. And then we have organisms. Now, organisms, as we mentioned, are groups of components put together. An example of that might be a footer. Here you can see the footer changing. I can put it in all these different colors. Another example might be a hero space. And again, I can change the colors of those things. I have endless number of organisms here that you guys can browse through. And then we have an example of a template. And a template allows you to see all of those things rendered in a real life example of what an application would look like. And again, you can turn it into light mode and dark mode. And we've taken care of everything, including images, which shouldn't be in full brightness in dark mode. They should also have a reduced opacity. So finally, well, now that we have that, how can we extend that into Figma? So the way we do it, right now it's not 100% graceful because we're waiting for our plugin to have a little bit of an update before it becomes something that's a little bit more user-friendly to use. But if you go to our documentation, which is provided in our Get repo, and then you search on Figma, you will find the directions on how you get started. Now, you do need a beta version of Figma's latest release. You also need to get a plugin called Figma Studio, Token Studio, and then you will link to our Figma file. Now, as I mentioned, this is our out-of-the-box Figma file. You will download this, copy it, and what you're going to do next is I'm going to show you how we export the code from our theme builder into Figma to transform this file to represent your designs. So I come in here, and the first thing that I need to do is open my Token Studio plugin. Now this takes just a minute, so I'll get that going and get it started. And then what I'm going to do, now this is what we use to import our JSON. And if you come into the file, you'll see all these different pieces of our design system. The only thing that you need to update is the base code, which tells us all about the atomic settings that you're providing, the light mode and the dark mode. And then I'll show you some of the magic that happens. So you come in here, you click on the JSON code, and now you guys can all see what that code looks like. And I go back to my theme builder, and I'm going to click on code and then JSON. I'm going to see this window with the base code. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to come back to my Figma file, and it's not as elegant as it should be right now, but we have to copy and paste that in there. You're going to hit save. I'm going to go back and grab the light mode, which is just under that. So I'm going to copy that. I'll go back into my Figma file again, go to light mode. All right. Sorry. All right, so there we go. What we are working on is there will be one file that you'll have to update rather than 3, and then the magic will happen. But it's not there quite yet. And then finally, we need to grab the dark mode. So I'm going to copy that, and we'll go back to our Figma file and dark mode. OK, here we go. All right, so now that that's done, just a few more steps here, and then we're all done. We need to sync our variables. So I'm going to hit sync variables, and I'm going to update the names and remove any ones that we're not using. And that takes a minute. And unfortunately, in Token Studio, there's no process indicator. You just know that you can start, there it goes. You can see it start changing things on the right there. When you start seeing things change, that's when you know it's done. Then we're going to also sync our styles. So I'm going to just hit yes there. I'm going to hit apply to page. And then what we should see is that the whole design system here has been updated to reflect what we had built. And unfortunately, this design system is monochromatic, so you're not seeing a lot of colors here. But what you will see is it has all of the gradients, the backgrounds. We're working on the colorblind charting colors. This is what that is going to be. You have your states, you have your hot links, you have your shadows. All the things that you built are built here. All of the components that you built are rendered here to your liking. Let me go to my buttons. Maybe I can show you there. If I go to my buttons, I can see my square buttons. I have small buttons. I have icon buttons. I have group buttons. But the other thing is that not only are these components all rendered and available in light mode, but everything here is also available in dark mode too. So the same flexibility that we're giving you in the React library, we're giving you here. And you can also use Token Studio to turn on things like dyslexic mode that is simulated in the user experience as well. So if I go back to Theme Builder, that's one thing I didn't get to show you guys. Up in here on the right-hand side, you'll see that I can turn on my dyslexic mode, and that represents that. We have motion sensitivity. I can turn that on or off. Right now, the only animations that we have in our design system are animating some focus and target states. But as we introduce more animations, you would see that having more effect. I can also toggle between, and this isn't just for the demonstration of today, but I can put it in tablet mode or mobile mode. And the things that you'll see is that the buttons and the target areas are changing to whatever my target area was set at. but also things like my headers are changing, because you don't want to use the same size headers that you're using on your desktop as you do on your mobile and tablet. But now we have one design system that does light mode and dark mode, mobile and tablet, and it has these additional accessibility layers. As I mentioned, we're going to have those additional layers for color blindness coming. But one thing I want to show you guys is from a coding perspective. If you look at my code here and I go to, say, my banner area here, let me see if I can, I should have put my glasses on. So, okay, here. If I look at this here, sorry. All right, so here it says background, data background. If I change that from colored to, say, black, all of the logic gets applied. An engineer doesn't need to know what color button am I going to have to change that to. He doesn't have to know anything. It literally just needs to change that. You can also change data. It's called data motion sensitive to on and off. You can turn accessibility and color blindness modes, and we'll put all the logic in there. And it's the same in Figma. If I'm in Figma and I am a designer and I'm creating things, I don't need to think about it. And here's a little example. I have a grouping of components here. If I drag these components from this green box to this black box to the white box in dark mode or light mode, they're automatically going to change the colors that they need to be. So again, we're trying to make this foolproof for our designers and our developers in order to make experiences that are 100% accessible. All right, well, that is it in terms of my demo. Let me go back to the presentation just to sort of tell you guys where we imagine this going next, but also so that you guys know how to connect with us. So as you guys saw, we're just exporting this right now into Figma and to React. What we imagine is that this might be logic that you can export into something like PowerPoint or Node.js or Xcode, right? Because again, these are all experiences that need to be accessible to your end users. And you may not know this, but your employees as well as your customers need to have 100% accessibility, right? And you're actually exposed to lawsuits by your employees as well as by your customers. So that's where we imagine this going. Additionally, we're exploring, is there a possibility we could take the logic into sending you how you get your bill? If you told us that, you're colorblind and you need a larger font, for example, can we send your physical bill to your house so you can understand if that FISCO score is in red or in green, or you can read the bill, which was in really small fine print. So if you guys are interested, again, here's our Git repo. We are looking for contributors. We would love for you all to help us redefine what accessibility means. And on the right is the online instance of our application. And again, we're looking not only for engineers, we're looking for product owners who are maybe passionate about managing. We're also looking for designers and UX researchers, because again, that's where the magic happens. So thank you all. I'm sorry that I was sort of squeaky today, but I really appreciate your time.